Well, there are three, what you might call even silly stories. But when we mix them together as a cocktail, like all cocktails, they'll mess with our head and maybe evoke a response in us. And the first is a little anecdote about the local priest who was being harassed by a group of children. They were laughing at his cassock and his broke belt, and he really got quite tired of their jibes. So he said to them, quickly, quickly, go to the pond. There's a fire-eating dragon that's taken up residence there. So the children went running off. And all of a sudden, the priest saw all the townspeople running down the road towards the lake. And then he said, where are you going? He said, oh, we're all going to see the fire-eating dragon. So the priest started to hurry after them, thinking, oh, I better go and see, because after all, that could have been divine inspiration. And then, you know, in Afghanistan, in the olden days, there was a superstition that when women were pregnant, if they didn't have their desires fulfilled, the fancies that women have, that they could put the evil eye on you. So one day, Mullah Nasruddin took his heavily pregnant wife into town, to the town square, and went into a kaftan shop. And she wanted to choose a kaftan for herself. And the shopkeeper was a hard bargainer. She found the kaftan she wanted, and she went into some hard bargaining with him, but he wouldn't back down. He wouldn't back down at all, until finally the wife got angry and said, all right, I'm not buying anything. She grabbed the mullah's arm and went off down the street. And all of a sudden, the shopkeeper remembered, oh my God, she might be pregnant. Could have put the evil eye on me. He went running off down the street after the mullah, grabbed him by the arm and said, Mullah, Mullah, please, please make your wife buy the kaftan. And he said, oh, Mullah said to him, don't be a stupid fellow, you know that's only a cultural superstition. Yes, yes, I know, said the shopkeeper, but just in case, please ask your wife to buy the kaftan. Just in case. It's true. Then there was a story about a man who sold hats for a living. One day he'd be in Samarkand, and the next day he'd be in Bokhara. But as he was traversing the path that brought him to all his places where he sold his hats, he happened to pass through a forest. And he was tired, so he lay under a tree to sleep, and he went off into a very blissful sleep. But when he woke up, all his hats were gone. He looked up in the trees, and there was an array of monkeys, all looking wonderful in his hats. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my hats? What am I going to sell to the people? So he waved a stick at them. So they waved back at him. They waved his arms around, and they waved their arms around. So finally he had a thought. He took off his own hat and threw it on the ground, so they all threw down their hats. So he was able to gather all the hats back again and go off to town and sell his hats. Well, a couple of generations passed, or a whole generation passed, and it so happened that although the hat seller had passed on, it was a trade that had been passed down from generation to generation, and his grandson had taken up this. And it so happened that he was traversing the same forest. Well, he lay down under a tree to rest, and when he woke up, all his hats were torn up in the tree, were all the monkeys wearing his hats. So I tried everything. Threw a stone, and they threw mangoes down on his head, and he waved his arms around, and they waved their arms around. And then finally, he remembered what his grandfather had told him, the story. So he took up his hat and threw it on the ground. The monkeys just sat up in the tree laughing at him. And then one cheeky monkey came down and poked him and he said, "Ah, Hassan, do you think you're the only one who's got a grandfather?" So when we make a little cocktail out of these three stories, okay, like any cocktails, the bubbles come up and kind of mess with your head, so maybe you can't even think straight. But usually, well, I don't know about you, but if I have a little cocktail, I get very talkative. So, what do these three little stories bring up for you? What is the thought that arises out of there? And of course we're talking about the mind.
How our beliefs colour our behaviour.
You bet. Yes.
Yeah, I've been looking at that quite a lot in the last couple of days, and actually had a little look back into the Celestine prophecy thing, because there was all this kind of energetic stuff happening between these people. It's like, oh, what's going on? And it was just really interesting to have a look back over that. I think that book is really beautifully written, and just see how people treat each other because of what they believe to be true of a situation. And I think the beautiful stories you just told are just a really great reminder that, not to take it all too seriously, and maybe just realise those beliefs aren't necessarily, real or needed in the moment, to catch them as they come and have a good laugh, maybe.
Yes. So where are we placed then in relationship to the mind? What is truth for us? How do we deal with that? There's always a cocktail. It's going to colour whatever it is that comes up as our thoughts and what we say. How do we deal with that? This mind that's been enculturated with superstitions and its belief systems and its experiences that were conditioning, you call it. You know that story about, I know my own grandfather was born an Irish Catholic. And of course he totally shunned the Catholic Church. But as soon as he's dying, he was the first person he calls for the priest to come along to give him absolution.
Just in case.
Just in case.
That's very common.
It's very common.
Very common. Yeah.
I'm sure you must have
On the
seen.
deathbed.
On the deathbed,
Yeah.
yes, all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Just in case. Or is it sight, knowing that people who are dying have a step in the next world? Where is the truth of it?
That Elizabeth Kubler-Ross found that her 30 or so years of work with dying people, when people died and came back, they discovered that whatever they believed in, that's where they went.
That's where they went. Yes. Yes.
So whether that's actually what happens really, or just what happens if you die and come back, who knows? Because nobody's told us what happens if you don't come back.
It seems another thing, you know, it's come up for me in meditation about how you know, we have sort of concepts of what, you know, different aspects of religion, the Bible and Torah and all this sort of thing. And yet one of the greatest things is when to let go is you know, like we talk about going to void and the emptiness, and yet somehow or other it's just that little personality thing that just keeps hanging on, doesn't it? That we kind of hang on because we're not sure what it is, and so we you know, to just totally let go, it's quite scary for us.
Yes, yes.
To go into that total unknown.
Absolutely. And when one thing is taken away, we replace it with another.
Yes, that's right.
This is the way of the mind.